Hey everybody, I bless you. I bless you now in the name of Jesus, that you would know Jesus more wonderfully this morning, that you would be healed in your body, in your mind, in your emotions, in your spirit. I bless you to flourish and prevail in whatever challenges you're experiencing and facing right now. I bless you to know the guidance of God and the direction of God for your lives and the questions that you might be asking. And I also bless you to know the love and the hope and the joy and the peace of God in your spirit, in your life during these days. May it be. May it be. Okay, so I have been going to these morning prayer times, these 8 and 8 prayer times, and I hope that you have been enjoying those and taking advantage of them. Psalm 16 came up a couple times this week, at least twice that I was paying attention to. I was looking at Psalm 16, and in the middle of Psalm 16, there was a verse that caught my eye. David's writing, and he says, "The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance." Now, I don't know exactly where David was in the land at the time where he was writing this, whether he was in the Negev or whether he was in Hebron or Jerusalem or in the wilderness. I don't know where he was when he wrote this psalm, but I've been going through this study called The Bible Lands and Biblical Faith. We're all going through the study, and I'm seeing over and over again that there is beauty and there is goodness in every part of the land, but there's also challenges in every part of the land. And what we're seeing over and over again in this study, that to be like a David here who is praising God for the goodness, in this case, the beautiful aspects of his inheritance, that he is intentionally focusing on the good while not giving much voice to the challenges, the anxieties. And he does hint at the threats later on in the psalm, but his focus here is about praise and it's about the good things. And that's kind of what we're talking about as we're going through this series of the Bible Land and Biblical Faith. We're talking about living by faith. We're talking about living thankful. We're talking about not being blind to the good and the beautiful and the excellent things in our lives, even though there may be some challenges, even though there may be some awful going on. We don't want to miss the good no matter what our life is like right now. Today we're going to talk about a different part of the land as always, and we're going to talk about this place called the Shephelah. And here's a map, or two maps. Now, Shephelah, that's a pretty funny name, right? Go ahead and turn to the person next to you, or look out the window and try and say the word out loud. Shephelah. Shephelah. I'm looking around the room. Anybody gonna try this? Shephelah? 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 Yeah, it's weird, right? It's pretty funny, but I'm practicing it. I will probably mispronounce it throughout this time. It is Shephelah. I will probably say Shephelah because that's kind of how I first heard it, or Shephelah. That's not right either. Shephelah. Okay, so anyways, that's it. What it means is lowlands or foothills. That's the name of it. And we're talking about the lowlands, the foothills between the Philistine coastal plain, as you can see the orange bit on that map, and the hill country, the higher hill country of Judah, which we talked about last week. And we saw pictures. That was a rugged, high, safe, secure place. Well, the Shephelah is the bit right in between. It's about 12 to 15 miles across. Now, the Shephelah is the place where God's people encountered those who lived very differently from them. The Shephelah is the place where God's people encountered those who had very different values to them. The Shephelah is a place where God's people would encounter those who were often hostile, either in how they talked about them, what they said to them, how they felt about them, and sometimes how they treated them. It was a hostile place. That's the Shephelah. Now, if you're new to the Bible, the Philistines lived on the other side of the Shephelah, the Philistine coastal plain. And the Philistines were a very strong local enemy for God's people, constantly from the time Israel moved into the land. And they are there generally and they finally get eradicated between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and they're no longer a people anymore. But definitely in the invasions near the end of the Old Testament, they're getting crushed quite fiercely. But yeah, the Philistines are the ancient enemy of Israel. Fun fact for you: the Romans were in charge in Jesus' day. After Jesus' day, after the book of Acts had been written and those events had taken place, the Jewish people revolted against Rome twice, around 70 AD and around 135 AD. After 135 AD, the Romans were so angry and frustrated. I mean, they crushed the Jewish people and all that kind of stuff, but they were so angry they renamed the land. And they basically named it Philistine Land. They named it Philistine Land, or Palestine. Palestine, Philistine. They knew the ancient hated enemy of God's people, and so they named the land after. They didn't exist anymore, but they named the land after the Philistines, and it's called Palestine. That's where the name comes from. The Romans, just fierce anger, just kind of driving that knife home with them. That's just fun free fact for you. By the way, if you're in the land of the Bible, the most politically way to refer to it when you're there, to not offend people, is to call it the Holy Land. It's the least offensive of terms to the people there. Anyways, let's talk about the Shephelah. And let's start with the good. Let's start with the beauty. Let's start with the wonderful perks of living in the lowland, the foothills of this area. Here is a picture of what much of it looks like. It has much better food. Much better water. The closer you get to the coast, the more flat the land is, the better it is for farming, and you've got these beautiful valleys that are brilliant for growing food. There's hills there, foothills, not so great when it comes to growing food. Maybe some orchards or something like that on there, but the valleys are just wow, just amazing for food. On one side, like I said before, you've got the coastal plain where the Philistines lived. That's the best. That's the best food. That's the best land for food. It's incredible. On the other side, we had the Judean foothills, as we saw on the map, and we saw that land ran 60 days short of food last year. Or we talked about that last week. 60 days short of food. The Shephelah here, the foothills, they have enough food. They have enough food, and it's a pretty great place. This picture you're looking at here is the Sorek Valley. It's one of the 5 or 6 valleys that come in off the coastal plain into the promised land, into the land of Israel, and they kind of carry that coastal plain goodness when it comes to growing crops. They're very fertile. There's several of them from north to south. There's we would probably call it Iolan, but you don't say the J, so Iolan. You'd say a Y sound, Iolan. Sorek, going north-south, Iolan, Sorek, Ila, and then to a lesser extent, Guvrin, and then further south, Lachish, or you would probably say Lachish. These valleys were just great, and they just they went inland. They went from west to east, and they just were just great for food, but ripe for conflict. Great for food, ripe for conflict. Let me explain how this area works, the Shephelah. Okay, so this is a map, a little bit more high-res map in order to help us grab it. The green line here on the map is a Brian Ingraham mistake. That's not right. But sadly, that's going to be on every map today. So the green line is, what I was trying to do is capture what is the main imperial highway. I just did it by memory. I was a little bit wrong. The yellow line is the main imperial highway going up the coast there. There is actually a split, and there was 2 main, the imperial highway divided here in this part of the land. And so both of those yellow lines are the imperial highway at this point of time. And then they come together just a little bit north of this map, and they stay one from there on. But there you've got the imperial highway. That's the main imperial highway with all the riches of Egypt and the other empires traveling back and forth. That is the money road, right? So that's it. Now you can also see on this map 5 red squares down kind of on the left side. Those are the main Philistine fortress cities on the plain. And those are the mighty fortresses, and you can see, just looking at it, they have the plain as their own. They have the best food area completely surrounded. That is their land, the best food land. They also have the highways that they're on, which means they're getting all the taxes and all the riches. They're rich in food, and it's just amazing, the Philistine land. You can see the red line that I've drawn on there. Now, that obviously wiggles and moves a little bit depending on who's advancing and who's retreating, but that's basically the line between the Philistines and God's people, and that's in the Shephelah. That's in the Shephelah. That's there, moves around. And the blue boxes are the Hebrew fortress cities, the Jewish fortress cities, and they're guarding these valleys that are going into the land. There's mighty fortress cities there along these valleys. The valleys that we're going to be talking about, the main ones that have to be protected best, are the three top ones, and you can see them in purple, those valleys that come in. And what happens is you're coming in, let's say as an army, you're coming in and you go through these valleys and then you go up onto the ridges and you stay up on the ridges. But these are the main ways into the land if you're going to invade, these purple lines here. And it's those fortress cities that stand to defend the Shephelah from the Philistines, from the invaders. The only other thing I want to point out is there's one city, it's squared in green, and that's to the north, Gezer. And Gezer is run by Egypt. That's their city. They had some cities along the main road to protect their interests, to protect their riches, and that one was Egypt's city, all the way from the time of Joshua, all the way through until after David's time. So that was that. Okay, so that's kind of our map, and you can see that the Shephelah here is the place where there's the interacting, where there's the conflict between these places. It's a place where God's people interacted with the ungodly. In fact, the people who despised those who were worshiping God. It was often a place of conflict. Often, not always, but often a place of conflict. Let me tell you a few stories in the Bible that take place here in the Shephelah. And we're going to go from north to south, from valleys in the north, going down to south, and then we're going to be also going in these stories in chronological order through the Bible. So the first one is in the day of Joshua, and that's up in the north here. It's in the Iolan Valley, which is supported by the fortress city of Iolan, same name. So we're up here in this north valley here. This is the most strategic of all the valleys. And you can see here a picture of what that valley looks like. So many stories talk about the Iolan Valley because it was the entrance valley to the Benjamin Plateau. Remember we talked about the Benjamin Plateau several weeks ago as the most strategic highland plateau that armies would try and get to, and if you could control the plateau, you could go up and down, you could go north and south and control the land. The plateau is the most strategic. So the Philistines and invaders would try and go up the Iolan Valley and defend. So then when God's people are pushing invaders out of the land, they would be shoving them out past this valley. And that's what we see in the days of Joshua. Joshua is driving people out of the plateau. And you come up to the story where remember where the sun stands still in the sky? I'm just going to look at this valley, and I'll read this from Joshua chapter 10. It says, "On the day the Lord gave the Amorites over to the Israelites, Joshua spoke to the Lord in the presence of Israel. Sun, stand still over Gibeon." Gibeon is the main city on the strategic Benjamin Plateau. "And moon, over the valley of Iolan." Over this valley. Moon, stand still over this valley. And it says, "And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped until the nation took vengeance on its enemies." And you read about how the nations drove them out through the Iolan Valley out to the coastal plain. And they were victorious. There's so many examples of this in the Bible, of God's people driving out their enemies through this valley. It's the main way in, and it's the main way out, the main valley of conflict in the Shephelah. Okay. That's the first story. Next map, going in chronological order in the Bible, also going north to south. The next valley is called the Sorek Valley. Now, I remember them in order because they don't spell the word ace. Iolan, Sorek, Ila. It's almost Ace, but it's not Ace, so that's how I remember, because it doesn't spell Ace. Anyways, so we're in the Sorek Valley, the second valley here. This is a story where Samson lived in this area off this valley, and the Samson story takes place right here. So you can see two yellow circles. One of them is on the Israel side of the red line, and that's where Samson's from, and he falls in love and wants to get engaged to a woman on the Philistine side of the line, a Philistine woman from Timnah, and she's on the other side of the line, and this is not Delilah, this is before Delilah. He gets engaged to this girl, and then it doesn't go well. There's several stories here, you can read about it yourself, but then ultimately, because of this moment, Samson starts a war with the Philistines. He's living here, and a lot of his battles and conflicts are taken right here in the Sorek Valley. He burns the Sorek Valley, the crops here, so that the Philistines can't have any crops. It looks like this. This is the Sorek Valley, and he burns the thing. Oh, actually, if you look at the hills in the background, there's kind of three bumps, right? It's kind of between the second and the third, just up on the hill where Samson's from, and then his fiance was off to the left, up on that same ridge over the valley. That's where they're from. But anyways, big conflict here, big conflict era, and lots of conflict here in the Sorek Valley. The guardian fortress city was a city called Beth Shemesh, and it's on this big raised tell, mighty centralized place to defend this valley. There's lots of stories connected to Beth Shemesh. Maybe one that I want to highlight today is there's a story in the book of Judges, it's actually in the beginning of Samuel, where the Philistines take the ark, they capture the ark, and then all these plagues break out in those 5 Philistine cities. And they decide to return the ark. And the ark gets returned, and it goes along the road right here to Beth Shemesh, to this fortress city. The people are excited that the ark has been returned. They look inside. Many of them look inside, and they get killed. They die because they looked inside the ark. But that's right here at Beth Shemesh, here at the guardian city, right on the edge of Philistine land. Now, that story that I'm telling you is not a story of conflict. And I want you to hear that. That's actually a story of making peace from conflict. And that's important to us. Yes, the Shephelah is often a place of conflict, but it's also the main place for making peace. It's the main place for making peace with your enemies, with those who have been hurting you, for those against you. We're going to just hold on to that for now. The final main valley that we're going to talk about is the Ila Valley. It's the third one down there on the purple lines there. Very famous conflict. Do you remember what famous conflict takes place in the Ila Valley between the Philistines? First, a picture. Here's what it looks like. Here's what it looks like. Again, beautiful valley. The famous invasion story against King Saul takes place here, where the armies are lined up and a massive giant Philistine named Goliath steps forward and starts taunting the armies of God. And a little shepherd boy who's not old enough to be in the army was out bringing food to his older brothers and to the commander of his brothers. And he hears this taunting. And David steps forward and says, I will go fight this person. And so he goes down to this brook, the only brook in the Ila Valley here. You see, and he picks up 5 smooth stones. This is where he picks up those smooth stones, just like these people. They want to be giant killers, right? So they're like, I want to be like David. They're looking for smooth stones in the brook. Obviously, a lot of tourists do this, and so they have to keep putting smooth stones in the brook. Finally, it's just part of the fun. But yeah, this is where he gets his stones, and then he steps up and he slays Goliath. Huge victory, and the invading armies who'd been in the Ila Valley, they rush back to their fortress city of Gath, and they're victorious. God's people are victorious thanks to God intervening in that situation through David. Okay, so those are some examples of the conflicts that are so common in the Shephelah. So common in these beautiful, fertile valleys. There's just so much opportunity, but so much conflict. Now, I want to make one more random note. Think about the significance of this gift. You're looking at the map here, And I told you about Gezer, the green boxed one up in, kind of in the north there. Well, Solomon marries the princess of Egypt. And by doing so, he makes peace with Egypt in that wedding. And as a wedding gift, Pharaoh gives Solomon Gezer. What a royal, incredible gift. It's right there on the main road. And yes, at that point, the yellow line and the red line are at the same place. It's right there on the main road, which means money. It means influence, empire influence. It means it's got the best food. It's just right there on that plain. This was an amazing royal gift. Here's a picture of Gezer from the aerial. It's a huge raised area on this plain overlooking all this flat farmland. It was just an amazing area. When Solomon made peace with Pharaoh, peace, prosperity for him, greater influence, greater goodness came to him, his life, and his nation here in the Shephelah because he made peace. When it comes to our faith lesson for today, I want you to ask yourself, what are the areas in your life that are like the Shephelah? What areas in your life are like the Shephelah? What places in your life are intersecting with people who don't follow Jesus and don't want to? What areas in your life are where you're around people who aren't trying to live godly and who actually don't understand and even look down on those who are trying to live godly lives? I mean, we live in a culture that does not value godliness and God's values and God's ways on a great number of topics. Western culture is not even trying, but I'm also thinking about specific people as well that you know who just don't share the same values. Where are the places in your life where there's potential conflict? Or maybe where there's often conflict? Family, friends, coworkers, fellow students, neighbors. Where are those conflict places? Those maybe not always conflict, but constant conflict, very, very close to conflict frequently. Maybe you've got some relationships that have peaceful moments, but have conflict often. The Shephelah places in your life are places where your life and your values and your beliefs are maybe mocked or disdained or rejected by others. The Shephelah places in your life are the places where peace is rare. Where peace is rare and inescapable conflict is high. The Shephelah places in your life are where you're attacked just because you're there. Just because you're different. Maybe just because you think differently or believe differently. Maybe because you follow Jesus. Maybe because it's just a personality thing. Or maybe just because they've got issues that they need to work on in themselves and they're unhealthy and it's taking it out on you. The Shephelah places in your life are where there's constant rub and agitation. Do you know where those Shephelah places are in your life? Can you think about them? There's a simple ancient Jewish blessing that goes something like this. May there be shalom in your Shephelah. May there be shalom. May there be peace in your Shephelah, the places where your life rubs against those who aren't with you or maybe who are opposed to you. May there be peace in your Shephelah. And you're like, how? How would I have peace in my life in these areas of such that are such ripe with conflict? Well, the Bible gives a lot of examples about how God's people are to live in a Shephelah-like life, assuming they are going to be surrounded by people who don't get them and who are hostile to them or their message. Paul is an example of somebody who lives like this all through his life, surrounded by conflict, whether it's beatings or imprisonments or riots, or like he understands living in a Shephelah-like life. And he writes in Romans chapter 12, he says, if possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. That's Paul, with lots of Shephelah experience, talking to God's people who are in a Shephelah-like life. If possible, it's not always possible. But as far as it depends on you, you need to make the effort but you can only do so much, but yeah. Live at peace with everyone. How? How do you do that? Well, Paul actually says a lot about this in Romans chapter 12. In Romans chapter 12, he says in verse 14, he says, bless those who persecute you. How do you make peace in this? You bless those who persecute you. You bless and do not curse. That's some of the how. You rejoice with those who rejoice, and you weep with those who weep. Those aren't just your friends or the people in your church. Those are people who are living in conflict with you. You emotionally connect with your enemies. Those people who there's rub against there. Live in harmony with one another. Not just your friends, but just with those who are persecuting you is the context here. Don't be proud, but instead associate with the humble. Do not be wise in your own estimation. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. How do you make peace in those areas of your life? How do you do that? You don't repay evil for evil. Give careful thought to do what is honorable in everyone's eyes, even the Philistines' eyes, even the Romans' eyes. If possible, which is what we read before, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Friends, writes Paul, do not avenge yourself. That's not how you live at peace in your Shephelah. Instead, leave room for God's wrath, because it's written, vengeance belongs to me, says God. I will repay, says the Lord. But here's how you live with making peace in your Shephelah. If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For in doing so, you will be heaping fiery coals on his head. Do not be conquered by evil, but conquer evil with good. That's the how. That's the how. And my encouragement to you, is there conflict in your life? Is there conflict? Try and calm it down. Try and calm it as far as you can. Don't repay evil for evil, but conquer evil with good. There is such reward in making peace. There is such goodness and reward in making peace. In the Shephelah, when there's years of peace, the people experience years of plenty. There's so much good food and crops and everything. It was so prosperous when there was peace. And then when Solomon made peace by this marriage to Pharaoh's daughter, he was able to thrive and thrive and thrive, expanding and prospering in the Shephelah. There's so much goodness in making peace. So as much as you can, without compromising your faith, without compromising your walk with God, as much as you can, seek to make peace in your Shephelah areas. As Jesus says himself, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. What are God's kids like? What is God's family like? Peacemakers. And the peacemakers are blessed. Family, may you have shalom in your Shephelah. May you experience and make shalom in your Shephelah. And may that peace bring about extra goodness and blessing in your life. Here's a challenge for today. What 3 practical things can you do? What 3 practical things can you do in order to conquer evil with good in your areas of conflict? What 3 practical things can you do in order to conquer evil with good in your areas of conflict? Let me pray peace over you, over all of us, over our lives and our situations. Spirit of the living God, I ask for peace. I know that you find joy in peace. I know it's one of the things that you can cultivate in our hearts. God, I pray that you would fill all of our hearts with peace. That there would just be a great filling of peace on the inside. And God, you have commissioned us to be peacemakers. Now help us step into that. Help us step into this great role of being people who make peace as your children all around our lives, even in the conflict areas. God, give us ideas. Give us very practical ways that we can overcome evil with good, and bless every one of our efforts. We look to you. May there be peace in our hearts and peace all around our lives. Help us to make peace. In Jesus' name, amen.